Well, welcome back to the Professional Dairy Producers Dairy Signal. And on behalf of PDP and the fellow dairy farmers I work for, we're excited today to have a topic that belongs to all of us and empowers all of us as dairy farmers and the whole farming community, especially in the United States, to come together. And we're going to be highlighting and talking about Farm ES, which is a program that is administrated by the um, NFPF. And so today, I want all of our fellow dairy producers, anybody listening live with us from the dairy community, to arm themselves up with questions. Anything goes. We're going to hear about the new Farm ES program. So with us, I have two of our experts. We have Megan Hain, and Megan is a veterinarian, a chief veterinarian officer with National Milk Producers. Welcome, Megan. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks so much, Shelley. So, as Shelley had said, I'm a veterinarian by training, with about 20 years in the dairy industry, which is, yeah, hence my gray hair. But I'd started out as a practicing veterinarian and that working with mostly dairy farms and that in the Mid-Atlantic. And in about 13 years into my career, I decided that there was a lot of sort of pressure on the industry and that, with these questions about sort of animal welfare and who was deciding sort of which direction that was going. So I wanted to see a lot more farmer voices and farm side voices in that conversation. So in order to kind of move that direction, I actually went back to University of Pennsylvania, did a welfare residency to kind of understand the science behind a lot of it, and then jumped back into industry. So for the last 8 years, I worked for a dairy cooperative up in Wisconsin, helping to manage their veterinary team up there and run their sort of animal welfare program. And the joys of working for a dairy cooperative is the dairy farmers are your bosses. So you get to really sort of learn, how to have these sort of productive conversations. So when the opportunity came up to join the National Milk Producers team and run the National Dairy Farm Program, I sort of jumped on that and really sort of wanted to embrace, what I learned at the cooperative in that with bringing farmer voices in the conversation, bringing both the science and the practicality of what happens on the farm together. So
That's awesome. So I hear I've got an animal health expert who's passionate and respects dairy farmers and wants their opinions and help us out. Okay, show's over. We've got everything we need to know. Hey, I'm picking up, and it doesn't sound like it's necessarily a Pennsylvania accent, nor is it a Wisconsin accent. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up, where you come
Oh,
from.
for sure. So I often joke and say it's a Southern accent, as I went through high school in Kentucky, but honestly, it's a deep Southern accent. I grew up in South Africa, and my family sort of immigrated to the States just before high school. So I've done my high school and university here. I'm a Buckeye. Did undergrad and vet school at Ohio State, and so very much sort of part of the industry here, but still have this lovely accent. And I always joke this is what got me into vet school because I sound smart, but it's also a great way to really sort of start a conversation and that you really sort of get to charm folks a little bit, or at least I hope so.
Well, I wasn't expecting South Africa, but I was trying to figure out where that's from. So also that opportunity to travel and see different spaces, that's a great thing to bring to the dairy industry. Sage Saffron, our second presenter that we have today. Sage, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I have been with National Milk Producers Federation for the past 4.5 years. I joined pretty much right after school. I went to the University of Connecticut, studied animal science and applied resource economics, and there really sparked my interest in the intersection between agriculture and sustainability, and obviously kind of led me very naturally to the dairy industry, just given how much awesome work is happening in the industry itself. In my role, I really work with Nicole Ayash, who leads both the pillars, but on the farm environmental stewardship and workforce development pillars of the farm program. And in my role, really work to integrate the latest science into farm environmental stewardship, as well as work really collaboratively with the cooperatives and processors that use the farm tool, as well as the farmers, to build it and help folks use it and get the most out of it that they can. So yeah, that's kind of been my work for the past 5 or so years already, which is crazy. But excited to be with you all today.
Well, thank you. We're excited about this program. For those that have worked with professional dairy producers for a long time, the farm program is something very akin to professional dairy producers from the early initiatives with animal welfare, and that is now wrapped into the farm program. And of course, with Your Farm, Your Footprint, that initiative, an industry-wide initiative, the farm program is such a critical part of that. So today we want to learn about the updates with the National Milk Farm ES program. What's new? How does it work? How can producers be involved with it? What do we need to be thinking about? Our mission of our organization is to help fellow dairy farmers in preparedness. So to be ahead of the curve on what's coming next so that we can be part of leading the industry. So who's going to start with kind of walking through, giving us some of that underpinning of the farm program, but then also to talk about what is new, especially with the updates with the farm program. Who's going to start?
I can jump in a little bit, and I'll talk a little bit about sort of the background of the program itself and the underpinnings of the farm program writ large. And as Shelley was mentioning in the beginning, in that, it was an industry initiative really in the beginning. It was those forward-thinking individuals like the Professional Dairy Producers of Wisconsin and similar groups that said, you know what, we're starting to get a lot of questions sort of about how cows are looked after. And we know that they're really well looked after on farms as the professionals who are really sort of managing them. But how do we end up sort of translating that, to the other side of the supply chain? So recognizing this need of having a sort of well-rounded program. So working together as an industry, it was essential to kind of have an industry-driven program. Two parts of that. One is, if you're not at the table, you don't get to necessarily sort of determine, what's going to be written, what the standards are, which direction things are going. So as frightening as it is sometimes, especially for a lot of dairymen, to really say, let's sit down and have a conversation about, animal welfare, and let's have a conversation about environmental stewardship and all of these things that we'd much rather just be doing behind the scenes and not necessarily have to verify. It's much easier to say, right, let's go through, we'll write the program, we'll build it together, and then we get to say what's sort of in it, as opposed to someone else sort of writing it and determining it.
And way back in the day, as a dairy farmer, when the farm program really rolled out in the mid like 2009, I think about when it was, the option would have been to wait as a dairy community and have our vendors or our clients up the chain that are purchasing our products. It could be what we saw in the poultry industry where McDonald's had one set of standards and Burger King had another set of standards, and all the way through the system would have been different, and we didn't think that would be good for the cows. And now sustainability, when you look at the US dairy industry, we're really good at making milk and making more of it with less of an impact. So you guys were grabbed onto that for our dairy community, and you've led that. What is new? How have we done on that as far as getting milk sourced and getting it under the farm program?
Absolutely. So as an industry in that, we ended up sort of pulling together this sort of process in that of sort of developing an industry-driven standard. The standard is funded through the Dairy Checkoff, but it's run by national milk producers. And a lot of that is more just that question of having the sort of independence, of the program itself. And even though as national milk producers, we're the ones that run the program, it's all the committees and the farmer groups that help to sort of write the standards in that themselves. And then the actual implementation of the program is through the cooperatives and processors, through the field staff who have the relationships with the farms. Those are the folks who actually implement the program itself. So this is a program that's developed through the dairy industry and owned very much by the dairy industry itself, sort of, and implemented that way. So that's essentially the way we developed it in that. And the farm program will do review cycles that run through about every 3 years, with the idea of just going through and, like farming, learning from the lessons of the past season and saying what things can we end up sort of fixing. And I know a lot of farmers sort of say, well, what's going to change in the next version? What are we going to sort of move to? Is it going to get harder? That's not necessarily the case. The big thing, like farming, is you've fixed the problems you found sort of in the previous cycle. You set yourself for where you need to be, for the markets, for where we need to be in that to assure sort of customers, and where we need to be for that sort of level of integrity in that. And as we're looking at both the animal care side of it and the science side, and Sage will talk to the science side of it in that, we evolve very much, with where the science is moving as well to be state of the art. Same thing as we do within farming as well. So I'll hand off to, sorry.
Yeah, the farm program gives an opportunity. The U.S. dairy farmer has been learning and improving and on a cycle of improvement since they started to really work with the cow to be able to sell milk back in the 1800s. So as a dairy farmer, to have not a fear, because we're always improving, but this gives us an opportunity, especially on the animal welfare side. One of the things that we wanted is to make sure that the standards were set around the needs of the cow. Do you feel the farm program has remained cow-centric? Because that was the vision of the first dairy farmers that really started this initiative, is that the first client is the cow. If you take care of the cow will take care of us. Do you feel that we've been able to achieve that as a sector with the farm program?
Certainly. And I think the big thing is the way the standards are set and the direction that we look, at least within the sort of animal care section of it, and that our standards are very much anchored on, like, our animal measures, and what is the cow telling us about, her welfare and that. We look at the folks who actually implement that. So we talk a lot about sort of employee training and that, as well as the people who are sort of looking after that cow and working out sort of from there. So it's very much sort of about the care of the animals, in that cow-centered approach.
The opposite of that, for any of our fellow dairy producers that are listening and they're trying to think, well, of course it would be cow-centric. The opposite of that is when we travel to other parts of the world and we start to see where there are standards put in place where the cow is a second client. The first client might be that someone said, well, I really want to see cows do XYZ for 3 hours a day. And maybe it's not the best thing for the cow. It makes you feel good as a human if you want to put human traits on that cow's needs. But when we keep it cow-centric, an example, would that be like looking at avoiding any kind of lameness, and what % of the cows need attention for foot care, or making sure that their stalls are comfortable, and looking at the cow for any evidence that would indicate that she's in any situation that's anything other than appropriately designed for her. Can you go into that a little bit more? Because when we get into the soil science and the environmental side, the same is true. We want measurable, we want it not to be based on emotion or someone who's not close to the subject to be defining, but we want to keep it centric on the topic. Can you just expand a little bit more?
Certainly. So when we're looking at, sort of animal welfare and that, big things we're looking at is sort of clearly defining, what does that sort of animal need, to be in a good state of sort of welfare. And as I mentioned, the most meaningful things we can look at is going to be measures of welfare that cow can tell us. So things like body condition score, sort of lamenesses, looking at hock lesions and that to get us an idea of, her lying area, is that sort of abrasive. Looking at hygiene scores to say, right, when we're looking at that cow, what's her sort of lying area like, in her bedding, sort of quality in that. Looking at sort of things like broken tails is a measure of what the cow's experiencing in that. And it's a little bit of a disjointed measure, but that's our look at sort of cow handling, and so we really try and focus on the things we can measure on the cow first most. And then for those things we can't necessarily measure, so say thirst, we often have to look at and say, right, do we have enough water available? that that cow could get what she needs. You know, is there enough feed space available that she could get sort of the feed that she needed? So we look at sort of our resource measures and that next. And then the last thing which we get out to is the things that we can't necessarily sort of measure on the day we're there. So one example would be, how do they manage down cows? Most farms are fortunate enough not to have a down cow on the day that we're there. So we often have to ask them then is, you know, what's your protocols? How do you manage down cows when you have them, to kind of get an idea of sort of how that's managed? We chat with the staff that are there, you know, to get an idea of if they have a good understanding of what the expectations are on that farm, you know, of how a cow is managed, to get an idea of, you know, is it sort of consistent within the farm? So we're looking very much at both science-based and practical-based, sort of repeatable measures in that, to say, you know, are we able to, on the day that we're there to visit that farm, are we able to consistently assess that, you know, what's done there is sort of done practically? Our evaluators in that are going out and doing this, they have to have experience within dairy farming. They have to have at least 5 years of experience in that, you know, working with farms. And on average, a lot of our evaluators have north of 10, you know, years of experience. So also understanding when they're looking at a situation of what's normal and what's not normal, you know, and being able to really sort of meet those scientific measures, but also put it in the context of, you know, what's actually sort of going on the farm there. So that's essentially what we're driving at. And before we talk about sort of where we are standards wise, I can sort of hand on to Sage, and we can talk a little bit about some of the environmental stewardship as well and some of the grounding there.
Absolutely. And Sage, you know, it's really hard to dissect when you're a dairy manager, dairy owner, and dairy farm. You know, the cows depend so much on feed, which is the obvious, but as farmers, and when we look at this overall sustainability of our businesses, our families, and our community, the first underpinning is we rely on water, soil, and air, and harmony with that around us. So tell us how that all fits in with what you're doing with Farm Yes.
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. So, just to kind of kick off, the Farm Environmental Stewardship Program really kind of works to quantify a dairy farm's greenhouse gas emissions and energy use. And so, our goal with this pillar is to really help folks get more information about what's happening on their farm in that environmental space, to then, you know, be able to make management decisions based on that if they're interested in seeing, you know, some environmental outcomes, some different environmental outcomes, as well as the program does and also really does function to help, which part of the origin of the program was to help kind of up the stream the kind of cooperatives and processors that were getting a lot of questions, almost similar to how animal care started, where there was a lot of questions about some of that great work that's happening on dairies and what is being done in the environmental space, as well as greenhouse gas footprint information. And so this was really the dairy industry's answer to be able to capture some of that great work that's going on. That the version or the environmental stewardship program really does capture just that greenhouse gas and energy use side. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention, since you mentioned kind of more of the water side as well, we have a conservation practice questionnaire that is an optional addition. That one launched a little bit later, but can capture some of more of the edge of field or water practices that are happening, if that is something that you know, you want to capture the good work that's happening as well, to do it more on that side. But yeah, it's a great tool.
And there's been a recent update or release that's now working out in the field. Can you share with us kind of what's new? When I think about farm and I think about the environmental module, and we'll hear terms like the Rufus model, which is, from what I understand, kind of the backside of the how it's run and the system and the mechanics of the modeling. But what's new, and what does it look like to me as a dairy farmer if I've been through the farm program a couple times?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And apologies, it will probably be a slightly long-winded answer. But so the Farm Environmental Stewardship Program, for version 1 and version 2, which some of you may have been through that evaluation. It was based on a life cycle assessment that the dairy industry conducted in 2008, and then the model was based on that life cycle assessment published in 2013. So it was an empirical model. Basically we were taking information, or data was being collected on dairy farms, and then it was being multiplied by an emissions factor, and you were getting the emissions from your farm. And I kind of jumped over this in the first question that you asked me, but the Farm Environmental Stewardship tool gives you your emissions results, and it breaks it down by your enteric emissions, so your emissions associated with digestion, the energy use, as I mentioned, as well as manure and feed production. So that's kind of the areas that we're looking at when we model emissions on dairy farms. But to go back to what I was saying about version 1 and version 2, that was the model we were using in the past. The RUFUS model, which RUFUS stands for Ruminant Farm Systems Model, was an initiative that was really exciting, and then the dairy industry was really jazzed and when we heard about it and were able to kind of help be a part of this great new model. It's a process-based model, so researchers were involved from all over the country, Cornell, UC Davis, UW-Madison, there were USDA folks involved. It was a huge collective effort to build this process-based model that really follows all of the molecules across the farm. So whole farm system, the way I describe it is it's really capturing the feed and everything that's happening with the feed nutritionally as it goes through the cow, determining what their emissions are on the digestive side and how all of that interacts. And then on the manure side and the manure management, maybe even being spread back onto the field and how all of those molecules kind of interact across the whole farm system. So we were really excited to be able to contribute and kind of collaborate on this scientific effort. Farm led an effort to help test the RUFUS model. So last year we worked with dairy farmers across the country to test the full RUFUS model. So that was like a real sausage making process, which really helped, I think, demonstrate the dairy industry's commitment to contributing to science and developing a model that worked for dairy farmers. So through that effort, we then were able to have discussions and have a working group as well that eventually enabled us to pull in the RUFUS model into Farm ES, which is what we have now with version 3 that launched in October of last year. So some of the cool and key points I would highlight in what we have with this new version is there are some options to have additional information. So the model itself, and I should say not the model, but so much the questionnaire, if the folks that the questions you're used to seeing, right, when you have an environmental stewardship evaluation, it'll look pretty similar. I would say the areas that I would highlight that are different is the option to add more information on the repro side. So if you wanted to enter information about the different reproductive management strategies you use on farm, we have the option to enter that in, but it is not required. It's just if it's something you're interested in, seeing how that could impact your emissions. And then we also have a field level side. So prior, in our other versions of Farm ES, we weren't able to capture the unique differences of what your emissions would look like based off of your field practices. And now we have that ability. So that is a really cool new function, as well as I would say just broadly, the fact that we are working with a kind of a living, breathing model. So there are researchers and people that are still actively working on it and continue to work on it. So as updates come, right, as new science is being published and analyses are being done on that science, it's going to continue to be incorporated, and we can choose to kind of pull that in so that the model continues to be the most accurate it can be. So some really exciting things that are on the horizon is they'll eventually have an economic module layer. So they will be able to do more analysis. It'll enable farmers to do more analysis on if they wanted to install a new, I always use this example because it's easy, but if you wanted to install a digester, right, what would that cost look like for you if you, things like that. So that's really cool. And then before I forget, because I realized I talked through this whole thing without even mentioning one of our coolest pieces of version 3 with this process-based model, because it's whole farm system, you can also run what if scenarios. So that is really exciting because we really want to put tools back in farmers' hands. And we are able to now, when you get your farm environmental stewardship evaluation, that baseline number, you're able to say, okay, what if I were to start feeding this feed additive? What if I were to install a solid liquid separator? You can see what that change would be, not only in emissions, but also milk production. So it's a really cool way to put tools, like I said, back in dairy farmers' hands and help you to figure out what works best for you and your farm so that you can make informed decisions. So that's one of the coolest, most exciting parts of version 3 that we were able to pull in. But I know it was a ramble, but I just wanted to highlight the dairy industry really, invested and put a lot of time and effort into this, which is awesome. And then we obviously have seen the returns already. So yeah, that's kind of the updates.
I don't think that was a ramble at all. There was a lot of information packed in both of those presentations. So I'm going to let's take a step back and start with the end in mind, or the why. Just in general, like as a dairy farmer and as a dairy farmer myself, we know we're doing the best that we can until we know better, and then we do better. Who is another client in this, or customer in the farm program that we have to keep in mind? We've got the cow, we've got the farmer. How does this help our suppliers up the chain? Why is the farm program important, and then why is it important that I continue to track my progress? I mean, we've made it 7 generations without it. Why do we need it? And there is a very important answer to that. Megan, can you start from your perspective, and Sage, you guys just dialogue back and forth. And I think we need to set that baseline, because there's a lot of farmers out there that are doing it because their processor has come and said, do the farm program. This is something that we need to be able to measure and do. But for the farmer, so what? And there is a big so what there.
Absolutely. And it's something that, I mean, we always talk about, hey, we do this and that for the customer, for that consumer sort of at the end. And it's sometimes sort of challenging within dairy farming, and that because we don't necessarily always meet that customer sort of face to face. But it is certainly something that customer sort of at the end, they trust us to do the work that we do. And that trust is highly important, but that trust is, like anything else, could be fragile. So any of these sort of programs and that we talked about, and we've talked about the animal care and the environmental stewardship, we'll talk about sort of some of the other programs as well that we have, sort of workforce development in that, the biosecurity program in that as well, and then our sort of antibiotic stewardship. But these programs are there essentially to help to maintain that trust. And the reason that we ended up sort of starting these 7 generations that you mentioned of dairy farming that we came up to here, a lot of those generations, folks were 1 generation from the farm, or they were on the farm themselves. So they knew the farmer sort of right then and there. So that connection was so much closer. They understood sort of where the milk was coming from, because, hey, they were sometimes the ones milking the cow, or they knew granddad was milking the cow. That connection was much closer. As we've gotten much better at what we do within agriculture, there are fewer and fewer folks who are actually connected to that farm, that are actually doing the work in that, which is a good thing in a lot of ways. Where, it's sort of a demonstration of our own success. But the challenge with that is that end customer, that consumer that buys that milk, doesn't necessarily have that connection with the dairy farm. And then you're relying on that trust sort of being on faith, which it worked for a good while. But then when there were questions that came up, a lot of our consumers didn't necessarily have that dairy farmer who was an uncle, or dairy farmer who was a grandpa, to sort of set that back to. So that's what's driven a lot of this sort of need for other ways to reassure that sort of customer there. So we do this, our cooperatives do this, and our sort of processors do this because their buyers ask them to do this, and their buyers ask them to do this because they're the ones who ultimately have to reassure that consumer. They're the ones who hold that relationship with that mother or father who buying milk for their kids or their families. So that supermarket has to turn around to the processors and say, hey, how are you going to reassure me that, I can reassure my customer in that. So that's why we end up sort of with these programs and that help to provide that level of sort of reassurance. And I know as dairy farmers, we much prefer the handshake and, face to face, but the challenge is this day and age in that we don't know most of our consumers. And as dairy farmers, I don't know if we necessarily want them all traipsing through our farms. So instead, we work as an industry to sort of build these programs written and sort of developed with industry and farmer sort of input in that to help to provide that level of assurance. And it's not quite as sort of nice as a handshake, but it's our sort of effort in that to provide that reassurance to maintain that trust, because we want those customers at the end of the day to really sort of trust us in that. So animal care was the first one because we ended up with a few things that really started to shake the public trust. So that was the reason that program was started to develop. And the farm programs really sort of stepped up as a sort of recognition of other things that could sort of undermine that, not as a way to say, hey, we have to do this, but to provide solutions from the dairy side of the industry to say, hey, we've got a solution that's built with sort of dairy farmers at the table to help to sort of reassure that. And I'll hand on to Sage to talk about both the environmental stewardship and then to talk about workforce development, which is one of our sort of newer areas we're starting to sort of see questions about.
Yeah. One thing I'll just piggyback off of that you mentioned, Megan, is I think one of my favorite things about the farm program, not only is that it's, built with so much industry involvement, right? Both the farmers themselves, but then also, field staff, cooperative and processor staff who are talking to dairy farmers every day, is that it's really also, there's a ton of support behind it. Not only is there a team of people, Megan, myself, so many others on the farm team, but also a ton of resources so that it's not just a, questionnaire, you answer the questions, you move on, right? We have built out a suite of so many resources for farmers. So whether it's leave behinds, whether it's, on the workforce development side, we have HR templates. So like an employee handbook template, things like that, can really set farmers up for success. So it's not just a quick, like, I'm going to check in with you. Okay, great, move on. It's actually giving tools to folks so that they can continue to improve their operations if they would like. So I think that is another big thing that I always think about when I talk about the benefit of the farm program is it's not just an evaluation, it's a whole, program behind it. That is, I think, also a really powerful story to tell when you're talking to customers about, the benefits that the program provides. On the environmental stewardship and workforce development side, I don't think it's any secret that, these areas have become more popular and of interest, I would say, from, the customer and the public perspective. And so when I think about the benefit of environmental stewardship and workforce development, it's really to help capture, and I mentioned this initially, those best practices and the things that are being done on farm so that you can kind of track those improvements. And more on the environmental stewardship side as well, be able to potentially open up additional avenues for diversification and other income opportunities for farmers as well. So I think those are all really great opportunities that can come up in the environmental stewardship side, maybe more specifically. And then on the workforce development side, I know that labor is a constant challenge for folks, and we really want to help farmers and support them in being, employers of choice, and both capture, we know the good work that they're doing to, have great staff and support their great employees, but then also equip them with the management tools that they need. I mentioned the templates and things like that. We always talk about how dairy farmers usually start a dairy farm because they love to manage cows, not necessarily people. And so we try to do our best to give them tools that they need to be the best employers that they can be, and support the folks that they work with every day. So those are kind of, the things that we try to do in the environmental and the workforce space as well.
Okay. So what's coming next?
Megan, do you want to start?
So I was going to say I will jump in before we jump onto what's coming next. The last thing I'll chat a little bit about is one of our other sort of pillars, which is biosecurity. And this is something that just the regular everyday biosecurity is something that's been part of the farm program certainly for a long time, and providing sort of farmers with the tools that they need just to keep our routine illnesses and that from coming on and off of dairies. You think of those pneumonias and that you brought in with a new batch of heifers and that. But then this last year and a half with avian influenza sort of jumping to the dairy side, and that we've seen the need for what we call sort of enhanced biosecurity, or a higher level of sort of biosecurity, and that for far more contagious illnesses and that. So the farm program has built the tools working together with the Secure Milk Supply, which had built tools for foot and mouth disease. The farm program's taken those and said, look, let's use these tools, make them user-friendly, and have them available in that for our dairy farmers that are having to deal with this emerging disease in the case of avian influenza. So those tools were available, and we had quite a few states that either sort of faced challenges or were preparing for challenges that utilized those tools to help their dairy farms get ready. So that's a lesser known pillar in that, but certainly something that we have available. But I just wanted to mention that before we jump into what's next.
Well, and also there's the antibiotic stewardship, ensuring that the products that leave our farm are pure and that we're leveraging the animal care products to maximize the benefit to the animal, but to make sure that, can you go into that a little bit more?
Absolutely. So within our sort of antibiotic stewardship and that, a lot of what we have within that pillar is a lot of tools that are available. And one tool that's actually a hot commodity for a lot of our dairymen and sort of vet students alike is we have a sort of pocketbook that has sort of residues and withdrawals for common sort of medications. And we will be at the end of next month and that at World Dairy Expo. And that's one of the tools we plan to take along, and that's really sort of useful. So a lot more of what we have available sort of for the antibiotic stewardship are really tools just to help farmers sort of in real time and that in helping to make those decisions and educate their staff, who are the ones who is sort of helping to administer those medications to make appropriate decisions and avoid sort of residues and that and some of the concerns there.
With the, the underpinning of all of that is a close and ongoing working relationship with their veterinarian, their professional who, every farm should have a VCPR, a veterinary client-patient relationship. And it's really through that relationship with the veterinarian that's overseeing the healthy herd health that goes hand in hand. Can you explain how you've worked with veterinarians in the oversight of the animal welfare program to ensure that all of this is knit well together? It's not just a checklist. It's not a manual that a farmer just passes along, but it is this relationship, and it's all baked in. Can you go into that a little bit more detail?
Absolutely. And yeah, I'll admit I'm a little biased in this one, being a veterinarian myself, but coming from that sort of background and that, and really recognizing that close relationship and that between that sort of herd veterinarian and the farm itself, the fact that veterinarian not only knows, the farmer, their animals, but their general management. So really sort of understanding the nuance of the farm and that, and being able to design treatment protocols that make sense, vaccine protocols that make sense, for a farm that maybe has dry cows out in the back 40 for a period of time, what schemes make sense for that particular farm. a lot of times we end up sort of thinking about it more as a financial relationship, but the honest truth is that veterinarian is a sort of medical professional who's often very closely invested with the dairy farm. We as veterinarians often work with those dairy farms once a month or even more frequently in that. So we know each other's families, kids, backgrounds, farms, etc. and that, and we're very much sort of invested in the long-term success on both sides. So that relationship really sort of builds into not just ensuring good health sort of on the farm itself, but then really sort of ensuring, good welfare for the animals themselves. So I think really leaning into that relationship and making the most of it, and that beyond just, as you say, paperwork, the VCPR forms and our protocols, but really leaning into that relationship and utilizing that professional sort of veterinarian and that to the full extent of their abilities can really help both the farm and the vet themselves.
So just in summary, to kind of summarize where we are so far, the farm program was developed, Farm ES was added. Farm program was developed to help ensure that we maintain consumer and public trust of the good work that's being done to produce the most healthy dairy products from our farms. Is that an accurate statement?
Absolutely. And maintain sort of both the trust and that of the sort of consumers, and help to reassure the customers who are the ones who are ultimately having to sort of answer to that consumer in the end. So that's essentially the reason we're here, and taking ownership of it by, as an industry saying, right, we're going to build these programs, is our sort of best way in that of ensuring that we have a seat at the table. We're able to define our truth.
Okay, so then talk about, and I know the answer to this because there's so many, the farm program was such a great model for bringing the whole food sector together to develop one program so that as a farm, you don't have 50 different programs that you have to verify that you're following, and they all have different rules. This one has the underpinning and brings everything together. Part of that is overall verification. So the food system said they won't go with the farm program. The farm program is just an example of the fox watching the hen house. It had to be tested, and it had to be verified that the farm program was true, and that the data being collected and the work being done was basically auditable. Can you explain how you have answered to those customers up the chain and how transparent the farm program is? How is that program reviewed?
Absolutely. So first of all, Annette, in building the farm program, and there's been several sort of versions, as we've ended up sort of building up the program, and a lot of that was to sort of build comfort within the industry. But one of the first things that really started to sort of build that assurance was to actually have standards that were required. So working in and saying, hey, some of these standards that are high priority are things that we are going to require within the program and really sort of follow up on. And we built in really focusing on more of the critical standards and saying, if these standards are not met, we staff is trained, animals have food and water, making sure that those animal measures are met, making sure that that was all sort of met and required. Those were one of the first steps that we really built sort of integrity within the program. Each of our, for the animal care, each of our sort of evaluations is once every 3 years. And in order to sort of ensure that those sort of evaluations are consistent, we built a very strong training program for the evaluators that are out there and that doing the evaluations themselves. They're trained, as I said, once a year. So they get a retraining each year to make sure that they're staying consistent in that, and they're going through doing those evaluations consistently. We also select a portion of those evaluations that are done sort of from the previous 6 months, and actually have a third party auditor go in and verify that those what they find, the data that they find from those evaluations is consistent with what our evaluators are finding. And each of those steps have really sort of gone in to build integrity and strength within the program itself, to say that we're consistent in our expectations, we're really following through on them, that there is sort of solid expectations to the program itself, making sure that our evaluators are consistent and what they're finding is the same from farm to farm or from evaluator to evaluator. And then really sort of going through and saying the data that we're pulling out of here is consistent and sort of valid as we're going through. So that's sort of the work we've done sort of on the animal care side and that. And I can hand to Sage with some of the work they've been doing in the environmental stewardship and that, really leaning into the science there as well.
Sage, tell us about that.
Yeah, so for just consistency's sake across the board, as Megan mentioned, we obviously have a pretty robust training process. So any of the folks that are going out to implement farm environmental stewardship go through both an online training and then we also have an optional kind of advanced training, especially just recognizing, as I was talking about all the new stuff coming with version 3, we have kind of an input or a Zoom training as well to help folks get caught up to speed on some of the new features that are included in version 3. And then on the workforce development side, we also have an annual training. That one is similar, kind of a well, it is virtual but live training, and we have subject matter experts that are able to catch people up on some of the things that are going on in the space, in the labor space, as well as some of the resources that exist regionally through extension or otherwise. So that, and then they go through the evaluation. But it's a really great way to kind of like keep people in the loop and familiar with what's happening even outside of just the farm program, so that when dairy farmers ask questions, they're able to kind of have more information or point them in the direction of a subject matter expert in the space. On the environmental stewardship side, I would say, just to hop back to that one, we are really lucky to have the great relationship with the Rufus team, like I mentioned initially. So we do have a lot of really helpful guardrails in the evaluation tool itself, so that when you're entering information, it won't let you submit something that is completely incorrect for that farm. So that's a really helpful way as well to ensure that data entry is accurate and captured correctly. So we have to say there's multiple levels there of ensuring that both on the ES and the workforce side, that the folks that are entering the information are well equipped and that they're entering accurate information as well. And just for clarity's sake, as obviously Megan mentioned, there's a third-party verification process for animal care. That's not something that we have on the environmental stewardship side or the workforce development side. It's just something that hasn't necessarily been, a big focus for our side. So just wanted to offer that clarity there.
So before I take the next step and ask a question, so just what I heard was, with the farm program, there's a second party assessment where someone likely from my processor that's trained, that goes through regular training themselves to make sure that everybody's getting a similar assessment. They will come out to the farm and they will do what is a second party assessment of the farm. And then the third party audit of the program, that's where outside of the farm program, someone comes and evaluates to ensure that the processor that is doing the second party verification, they're auditing the processor's program. They're not auditing the farms. They're verifying that the processors are doing what they said to verify what's happening on the farms. And there used to be a lot of confusion over that. And it scared the heebie-jeebies out of farmers to think that, the word audit isn't necessarily a word that everybody gets excited like birthday party over, that everybody understands that. So if that is true, I'm going to move on to the next question.
Absolutely. Yep. No, we're essentially verifying our evaluators, not farms.
That's really important for people to make sure they know.
Absolutely.
So National Milk has done a good job through the whole system of working with our family within dairy to get a majority of the milk all covered through the farm program. Where is that at today? What's the status of how much of the nation's milk is under the farm program?
Certainly. So about 99% of the US milk supply is now participating within the sort of farm program and that. And the lead program right now is our animal care, just because that's the key focus. And I'll hand it on to Sage. She can talk about, yeah, we've got a decent percentages. We're working up more, that we're seeing more of a focus in these different areas rather than necessarily that they're lagging.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Megan. And yeah, for the environmental stewardship program, about 80% of US milk supply is in the Farm Environmental Stewardship Program. They're using it. And about 60% of US milk supply is using workforce development. So I should also say, there's not a requirement to participate, obviously, in ES or workforce or even animal care, right? There can be somebody who's interested in just using the environmental stewardship program if they want. But obviously, we have seen folks continue to use animal care and environmental stewardship and workforce development because they see that value and it's recognized so widely. But
So with the changes and everything we were talking about, let's just go take 10 steps back. And I'm going to put on my producer hat and barn boots again. And talk to me as a dairy farmer about how I prepare for the farm program, especially specific to Farm ES. What data would be collected? What information and records should I have available? Is this something I need to fret about? Is it information that I wouldn't typically be gathering as I'm tracking my own progress on my farm as far as yields, watching my efficiency, my input costs, etc. How do I get my hands around the environmental stewardship side, and what are you looking at?
Sage, do you want to take that one?
yeah, happy to. And I'll also say I'll speak really generally of some of the data inputs that are required. But if anybody's curious, you can find across all the pillars. So animal care, environmental stewardship, workforce development, we have prep guides. So as I think we've probably mentioned it at some point during this conversation, but farm visits would never be unannounced, right? So you would know that an evaluator is coming, and hopefully they will have shared either. Sometimes folks have developed their own sort of prep materials as well, so it not necessarily is going to be farm branded, but we do have a farm branded prep guide that covers literally like what is the farm program, what is our purpose, and here are the data. Like here's all of the questions that you're going to be asked about. Here's all the material you need to pull in advance. And we've definitely heard from evaluators that having that stuff prepped really speeds up the process of going through an evaluation, especially I can really speak a lot more to the environmental stewardship and workforce development side. Megan can chime in more on the animal care side, but we've definitely heard that from evaluators that really improves the process. But some of the things that we ask about and some of the material you want to have pulled together, we ask just about like herd profile. So, your whole herd number, calves, heifers, things like that. We ask about your ration. So having your lactating ration ready to go and that record pulled, whether it's reaching out to your nutritionist to ask or what it may be, but that is a helpful thing to have ready to go. Obviously, I think most folks can talk through their manure management system pretty easily, but making sure, you understand and have you're able to talk through kind of where all the different manure management systems you may have in place. And then also the energy side. So, just making sure you have maybe your electricity bill, things like that together. I think those are all really helpful stuff to have ready to go. And then if you're interested and you want to do the crop side, obviously making sure you have some of your field records on hand. So we just ask about, kind of planting, harvesting. So dates generally they don't have to be exact. And then we also have the fertilizer application, manure application, tillage, but that's if you choose to enter the field side. But like I said, all of that information is available in the prep guide, so that's super easy if you want to go through and see what kind of stuff you need to pull together. So you should receive that too in advance of your evaluation, so that it just smooths and makes the process a lot more easier. But
So it's true to say it's pretty much all of the information that you're using in overall to manage your operation. You're watching your yields, you know how many animals you have, nutrient management to be able to do crop rotation and know where the nutrients are needed you've got soil tests and some of those kind of things. That is all incorporated and pulled together. What the farm program does is help verify and help you measure progress as you go. So does anybody worry about being a flunky, flunking out of this, failing, or is it continual improvement? What are you measuring?
Yeah, so for the environmental stewardship side and also the workforce development side, there isn't there's no kind of pass or fail. It's purely just a metric of how are you doing the kind of, I guess, on the environmental stewardship side, it's you're just trying to get a footprint of your emissions and capture what's happening on farm. We're super, obviously, the whole farm program is geography facility neutral, right? So we try really hard to communicate to folks as well that there's, sustainability is not a like clear path, right? There's no right or wrong. Every farm is so different, and what makes sense for them. They're obviously, farms are weighing a lot of different things when they're considering what practices or management systems they may want to implement. So we try our best to communicate that. So yeah, there's no right or wrong necessarily in the environmental stewardship side. And similarly on the workforce development side, our goal for that one is just to really spark conversation. And I would say it's probably similar on the environmental stewardship side. Try to identify where you're at, give yourself a baseline, and then go from there if you want to.
Okay, so as we're getting close to the top of the hour, a couple of things here. First of all, National Milk has been gracious to lead this program as far as running it, putting it on the ground so it works throughout the network, still incorporating the whole food system in it and being connected to the farm. Secondly, one of the things that we heard in a 2021 survey that professional dairy producers did, that it's no longer can we just say that we're on a cycle of continual improvement. This gives us a data point and a way to measure it and show it, but also measure our own progress, our herd statistics as we go. But then continual improvement, that there'll be a point where dairy farmers are going to have to show and prove that they are also doing their own educational tracking and the training of their employees. And that's where Dairy Advance, a program that now today you all have access to. It's a web-based continuing education platform for not only the dairy industry and dairy leaders, but other leaders that are dairy farmers as well. So if you want more information about Dairy Advance, DACE, talk to National Milk, as well as professional dairy producers could give you additional information about that. The whole point of the farm program was to help shine a light of transparency, which we are all very proud of as dairy farmers, and to prove what we're doing that maintains consumer confidence in the products that we produce. And we are glad to have partners like DMI, our National Checkoff Program. Today's program was sponsored by DMI, and there's someone that we're working with all the time on a dairy farmers team, and they're part of promoting our product, not only here in the States, but around the world, and maintaining that confidence, obviously partnering with National Milk. But the other thing is about transparency. And Dr. Megan alluded to this, that when we were all making our own food and had that one cow, we understood where our product was coming from. Today, we are 5, 6, maybe more generations away from that. And there will be people that will call the question, maybe that don't have the best interests in mind, if dairy is the best choice, not only nutritionally, but the best choice for the animals that we're working with and the best choice for our planet. This one program, National Milk's program that we have with Farm ES, helps all of us stand together as men and women that are devoted to producing food to prove that we are doing not only our very best today, but we're committed in doing even better tomorrow as we know how to do better. So this is where we can all own it and we can work together. Next week at Professional Dairy Producers, in the spirit of transparency and being proud of what we do in our profession, we will be doing our On the Farm ACE Twilight meetings, where we work with local officials, neighbors, and farmers. We do farm tours. They're evening activities. Now, these programs will be held on farm and just in Wisconsin, even though we have members across the country. So if you're interested in farm twilight meetings, the ACE, which is Agriculture Community Engagement, bring all folks out, invite local elected officials and others. That is next week with Professional Dairy Producers. If you want more information on how to incorporate the farm program, as well as get your carbon intensity score and know what your current baseline is on your carbon footprint. You can get more information about your farm, your footprint at Professional Dairy Producers. We thank you. This is why the dairy sector, the dairy community is so beautiful and so unique. I think all of us here are committed to, we love cows. That's why I grew up on the dairy industry, a dairy farm, always wanted to farm my entire life and have devoted my profession to this, but it's really the people. And it is very, very unique. And today, this is a good example of how we work together for a better tomorrow. So hats off to Dairy Management Inc., National Milk Producers, and every single man and woman that's out there taking care of the cows, their community, their land, and ultimately are devoted to their people. So signing out from Professional Dairy Producers, we hope we'll see you back here on the Dairy Signal on Thursday. And a hearty thank you. Take care of yourselves. And until then, bye now.